Hey everyone, welcome to Locked On Lakers for Friday. Brian Kamenetsky, Andy Kamenetsky, JJ Redick revealed more about how he wants to play this season at Wednesday's press conference. We'll break it down next.
You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks to everybody for making Locked On Lakers first listen of every day, Monday through Friday, no matter how or where you get your podcast. This one's always free, never behind a paywall. And of course, Locked On Lakers on YouTube, Andy, is where people can go if they want to watch the magic happen and hang out with over 25,000 subscribers to the channel, all of whom were reacting to stuff JJ Redick and Rob Pelinka said at Wednesday's press conference. We did not have a chance to get into all of it and can only do so much, Andy, in a half hour. So plenty still to talk about from that, including, I think most significantly, kind of talking about how they want to play and where certain players fit into that, whether Austin Reaves or Max Christie or D'Angelo Russell, whose name finally came up this offseason in ways that maybe people might not have expected. Doing to let people know today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So we did get we got a little bit of a taste of it on the Zach Lowe podcast earlier this week, and then a little bit more, Andy, about how JJ Redick wants to play and the things he wants to do at Wednesday's press conference.
Yeah, and side note, best wishes to Zach Lowe moving forward. I'm sure people have heard that he was let go by ESPN. Incredible coverage. So
unconcerned about his ability to find future employment.
Me neither, but it's still.
I'm not saying it doesn't suck. I'm just saying,
incredible coverage and a very, very nice guy on top of it. So
I think he'll land on his feet.
I think so too. And he went out on a hell of a podcast note. But as far as the way the offense in and of itself is going to be working, Redick reemphasized the idea of a lot of off-ball motion, a lot of just general movement. You got a real sense that Redick felt like the offense over certainly last year and maybe the last few seasons, that there was way too much stagnation and that there was just too much standing around in general. Like I thought it was telling when I think it was on Low Post when he talked about the idea of LeBron not always taking the ball up, dealing with like ball pressure 94 feet, like that the idea of just more variance in general with what they're doing. And I think more creativity, talked about defensively wanting to play with more physicality. I think wanting to try to just make opposing offenses feel them more, as a defense on the whole. And this came up with a few different players that we'll get into, but JJ Redick believes rightly the Lakers need to become a better team on the offensive glass, and that is something that was stressed a lot.
Yeah, and specifically they talked about crashing from the corners, which would involve Rui Hachimura. That came up in both the interview podcast and on Wednesday. It was a reminder to me listening to it again that I was listening on the radio. You were in the building. I was listening on the radio, but it is clear that Redick believes that there are things that were not optimized with last year's group. When he goes and he looks at the tape, it's not a question of here's how I want to play generally. And I think, these are my basketball philosophies. This is what I do. And, I'm going to figure out a way to get this group of players to play in the way that I want them to, whether it really fits or not. I think there's an element of that. Obviously he wants to play a certain way. He has a certain belief in how basketball ought to be played and what qualities make for winning teams and good offense and all that kind of stuff. But I think it is also pretty clear to me, listening to how he describes the way the Lakers played over the last couple of years, that he does not think that they were optimized in the way that they could have been, that this group could have done things and schemed and done things in a way that was better. Try not to throw coaches under the bus and all that other stuff. But I was again left with that very distinct impression.
Yeah, and I know there are a lot of people skeptical about the ceiling of this team, and we've talked about before why, while we do think that probably the consensus on this team, and certainly in terms of people who cover the NBA and the Lakers, but also I think what we hear from fans, I think you and I are higher on the team than a lot of the consensus, but we've both repeatedly said we don't think the team as currently constructed is, if nothing else, a front runner for the championship. And I imagine that if you injected Redick and Pelinka with sodium pentothal and asked them, do you think this team is a front runner, they'd likely say no. But I also think that they honestly believe that if you did more with the same group but better, you could have better results. How much space you need to have between better results and better enough to make everybody happy remains to be seen. But it's one of those things where even if they're not telling you everything that they feel in terms of just how much of a gap remains between where they are now and how good they think they need to be to win the ultimate prize, I do think they are being honest that they feel like there was, meat left on the bone last year in terms of potential and imagination and scheming. We are going to try to remove all the meat.
I think make sure meat removal. I think too often what happens is people are sort of conflating two different things. It's the Lakers, the ceiling, like you say, there was, even if there's space, the ceiling is not high enough. I think that is fair to say. I think and the floor for this team is really low. Like it doesn't require a lot of what ifs to get you, if not to the floor, too close to the floor. And I think that's mostly what is driving the sentiment about the Lakers and where they stand and whatever, and puts out kind of a vibe that they are worse than they actually are. I think the if you can say relatively healthy, this group they won 47 games last year. They were not very healthy other than their stars, which obviously is important, but is not the only thing that plays into health. They lost a lot of games in a lot of places all over the roster. And so I think that is important. If they have relative health, better coaching, you hope elevates that ceiling a little bit. It just doesn't make the ceiling high enough. But that's much different than the team isn't good. And I think too often those two things get conflated. The question is, are there too many things that need to change internally? And they obviously spoke a lot about internal improvement. Rob Pelinka spent a lot of time talking about internal improvement because that's what he had available to sell at this press conference, because there was no external improvement. If you are thinking about those things, and he and Redick both talked about Max Christie a lot and what he can contribute, and being a real template as a 3-and-D guy, and the ability to make a difference on both sides of the ball and all that kind of stuff, the versatility he might bring, and an increased role and responsibility for Austin Reaves, who might be able to take steps forward, and all these other things. They got into that a lot. It's just a lot of things that need to line up correctly for that ceiling to get there. And it's just, that's not a Lakers thing. That would be a lot for any team to say all of these things have to go right.
Yeah, I mean, unless you're essentially the Boston Celtics or one of the few unquestioned, OKC.
When you're Boston and your fifth best player is Derek White, you get a little more wiggle room than the Lakers.
Yeah, absolutely. But when we come back, we can get into. I thought some of the stuff with Christie, and in particular the enthusiasm expressed for what he can bring to the table, but also just the ways that they seem to think that he can help, I thought were really interesting. And then, some of the stuff about Rui, and then also the way D'Angelo Russell eventually ended up being discussed. So we can get all that coming up next. Locked On Lakers is brought to you by FanDuel. NFL fans, you can enjoy the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So let's just say it's the middle of a game. Start getting a feel for how you think things are going to shake out. You can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much else on the same page as you are placing your bet. So you got all that information in front of you, just trying to confirm exactly that hunch that you're getting. And you can get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Plus, we keep talking about the 24-25 NBA season is very close to kicking off, and our friends at FanDuel have options for you. As of this recording, the Lakers are 35-1 to win the title. Anthony Davis 150-1 for MVP. LeBron is 200-1. Dalton Connect 10-1 for Rookie of the Year, and Max Christie, who we're going to discuss, 150-1 for Most Improved Player. That's FanDuel.com.
Reminder to go ahead and make Locked On Lakers after making us your first listen. Go make the Locked On NBA podcast your second. Great way as training camps open next week to get a feel for what is going on around the league. Training camp opens next week. I'm so excited. We can stop with the offseason stuff and the speculation. We actually get to talk about things that are happening on a real life basketball court with preseason games soon to follow, and then the real stuff. In under a month, we'll be playing real games, Andy. So
Media Day is Monday, for those of you unaware.
So Locked On NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. A lot of guys came up. I mean, I do think they really did lean into Christie a lot. Rob, they were talking about why they made the investment. There's a lot of interest in him, and so much of these press conferences are driven by kind of what we're interested in and what fans are talking about, what the storylines are. And Hollinger wrote about Christie and that contract, and other people have weighed in on that. And if you're a diehard Laker fan, like, you spent most of last season wondering why Max Christie wasn't playing more. And so he is a player of incredibly high interest. So it wasn't surprising to me, and a guy that they need. It wasn't surprising to me that he was such a large part of Wednesday's press conference.
Yeah, it was mentioned that one of the reasons that they re-signed Max Christie to a contract before he would even hit restricted free agency, beyond the idea that you don't want to offer another team the opportunity to give Christie a larger offer that you have to match, it was also Redick's enthusiasm leading up to that point. Pelinka mentioned how just Redick really sees a lot of potential, not just in Christie as a player, but also some of the stuff that he really wants to do. Like, again, the offensive rebounding emphasis, for example. Max Christie is by far the best rebounding guard on this team. Mm-hmm. It's not a close contest, nor is it necessarily a massive badge of honor, but he's legitimately a good rebounder for that position.
Yeah, for sure.
And the way Redick kept talking about that emphasis on corner crashing, he's brought up Max and Rui a lot for that, because those are two guys that may often be spaced in the corner.
Right, they'll be the ones doing it.
But also, too, I think they come up a lot because they're two of the better athletes on the team. So it's something that you could at least theoretically picture as a skill with both of them, especially for someone like Max, who's a very good rebounder, seems to have a real, seems to have a presence for rebounding anyway. And also, too, it was talked up that 3-and-D prototype potential for Christie, if nothing else. And like, in terms of when you think about two-way players on this team, Anthony Davis is obviously far and away the best, but Max Christie might be potentially their second best two-way player on the team. His offensive role is more narrowly tailored, but it matters. And then defensively, he is, other than Jared Vanderbilt, until we see Gabe Vincent on the floor and what he does with this team, Christie's the best perimeter defender they have. So
yeah, I think it depends a little bit on how you define, how you're weighing two-way player, how you define the ratio of offense to defense that plays into it, all that stuff. So there are other players you could discuss, but what stuck out to me about it too,
I would argue there's too few players we can discuss. That may be part of the problem.
You can make a case for Reaves. There are other guys you could talk about, at least in theory. What stuck out to me is just from what you were saying there is the distinction between the corner crashing thing with Max, where you're saying how can we engage this guy who's a good rebounder and get him to do it versus Rui, who is not. And when Redick talked about Rui in that, it was in terms of role, I think there's something we will define with him. We'll be open-minded to that evolving. Rob brought up the corner crashing because when he's not posting up or not playing out of closeouts or not screening, Rui's an excellent shooter. We want him shooting corner threes. So he's already going to be in that spot to corner crash. We're going to try to ramp up his offensive rebound, and we're going to ask a lot of him defensively too, particularly with bigger wings. We'll see how that goes. But with one guy, you're talking about maybe leaning into a strength that he has as a player. With the other guy, you're talking about trying to activate something that he's actually not good at and finding a way to activate a part of a guy's game that he has never really thrived in. I mean, the lack of rebounding from Rui for a player of his size and athleticism, it has been something that really sticks out. So when he has 6 or 7 or 8 rebounds in a game, you're like, whoa. But most
shouldn't feel that way.
Right. I'm not saying he needs to average 10 rebounds a game, but more than 4. Right. Forwards, you'd be you shouldn't be woohoo when he gets to 5, playing 28, 30 minutes a game. That should happen more often than it does with Rui. And so those kinds of things are interesting. It's you are, and when we talk about optimizing players and where a different style, a different coaching, different ways of using players could have an impact and raise their win totals, assuming they have relatively similar injury personnel and all that stuff from last year, it is stuff like that. I'm not sure it's going to work. Rui may not, the corner crashing with Rui Hachimura, we might in 10 games be what happened to that? When did that stop being a thing? But maybe it is something that you take an element. Maybe he never becomes a great defensive rebounder, but now it's a little bit of a weapon that other teams have to pay attention to with the Lakers on offense and offensive rebounding generally. Maybe the threat of offensive rebounding, maybe that becomes something that helps the Lakers out defensively because teams aren't quite as aggressive. They don't feel like they can get out and run as much. They got to be a little more careful because they know they have to protect their own glass against the Lakers. They're going to be aggressive there. So we'll see. These are the.
They should make sure that Rui understands that it's a way for him to get another shot. If he's unaware that this is another way.
How often do you see somebody pass after getting an offensive rebound?
Right,
they almost always just shoot.
You never pass anyway, but in this case, nobody expects you to.
Right. It's
we think we're giving you the green light to immediately put up your own shot.
We call this the you do you strategy.
Exactly.
But these are the sorts of things that stuck out to me. It's we're going to ask him to do a lot defensively. Okay. Are you doing that because you think he can do it? Because you think, this is a way, again, we're going to activate something in a player like Hachimura that maybe hasn't been activated before. He's not an awful defender in a lot. He's just not great.
The things that he's fine at, he's fine at. The things that he's not good at, he's really bad at. And so, or are you doing it because look at our roster. Who else do we like? There's a lot of that, I think, with what the Lakers, and I think it's important to, especially as we get in training camp and this and that and the other, and you start hearing descriptions about players before the games actually start, and what we're going to try to get. A lot of this is just based out of necessity. Sure.
Like the roster is the roster. And so they do need Rui to do more defensively. They needed Rui to do more defensively last year. They were asking him to do it. He didn't, sometimes he did it, sometimes he didn't. How you can maximize players and get the most out of guys while hiding their deficiencies is going to be tricky because you can't hide everything.
And D'Angelo Russell, who was hidden in terms of mentions for about 3/4 of this press conference, eventually his name was mentioned. Redick's thoughts on D'Lo were pretty interesting. So get into that coming up next. Locked On Lakers is brought to you by PrizePicks, America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active users. PrizePicks is the easiest, most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. All you got to do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. PrizePicks is the best way also to get action on sports in most states, including California, Texas, and Georgia. PrizePicks is the only real money daily fantasy platform with an insurance injury policy. So your lineups stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. If the player leaves in the first half, doesn't return with PrizePicks, your picks are still live and you can collect your winnings in 15 minutes. Download the PrizePicks app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONNBA on PrizePicks to get 50 instantly, just playing 5. You don't even need to win to get the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game.
So a tremendous amount, Andy, has been made of on Lakers social media. Again, we're talking about the diehards, the everydayers for a show like this, the people who are going from our show to other shows to all these things, the people who tune in every week to make sure they hear Lakers talk Monday night on 710 ESPN, hosted by Andy, 7 to 9. So that D'Angelo Russell has been talked about very little in any other context other than is he still on the team? By Rob Pelinka, by JJ Redick, by whatever, whenever these interviews have happened to whatever degree they've happened over the summer, D'Lo just isn't talked about. He wasn't talked about for most of Wednesday, but he was finally brought up. JJ Redick was asked about D'Lo, and the response might have been surprising to some fans.
First of all, I also think it's worth noting it's not just fans who've picked up on this. There are people who cover the team who've picked up on this as well. Like this isn't just, eggs on Twitter talking about this or people leaving comments on our YouTube page or whatever. And please keep leaving comments. Like these actual media members have picked up on this as well. But Redick said that throughout this offseason, D'Lo was the player that he's talked with the most out of anybody. That includes, LeBron and AD, who Redick went overseas to watch in the Olympics. And, Redick's had dinner with AD. He's talked about that. Like they've been in a lot of communication, said that he's going to have a major role in the team. And this was interesting. Redick said that he talked with D'Lo about putting him in a position to have a career year. And apparently not just me, but I can only take responsibility for myself. I initially heard it in real time as a career here, which obviously is a very different context than a career year, although to some degree they could be intertwined. I listened back and it turned out it really was.
It was definitely said career year.
Yeah, he did. But I think just even, I guess, an auditory Freudian slip that I heard speaks to the situation with D'Lo right now and how tenuous things can seem for him, even considering how important he is on this team for however long he's on this team.
I mean, the reason mostly I think Russell doesn't get talked about a whole lot is because it's very obvious that the team has been trying to move him, that they will continue to try to move him, and all these other things. So you combine that with the fact that like there's not a lot of mystery that's left about Russell's game. Like we all know, he's a strong 3-point shooter. He's a better point guard than he gets credit for. He's a good, secondary scorer for your team. And if there are nights where you need another guy to put up 20, he can do that for you. Like that's not a problem. We know he's not very talented defensively, no matter how hard he tries. And we know that sometimes there's question as to how hard he's trying. We know that when the playoffs come around, that there's some of those deficiencies are going to be out there for people to see. And so, he's one of these guys that's in a weird spot. He's not Austin Reaves, who's still seen as an ascending player. He's not, Max Christie, who's a young ascending player. He's not LeBron and AD, who are older stars, but like they're stars. And he's not
or
seen
someone
as
like
a guy
Rui, where you wonder about untapped potential.
Right. And he's not somebody who's seen as having a long-term future with the team. Although I keep trying to tell people, like there's just as good a potential. We're going to be in the exact same position again next year where Russell signs a 1-year deal or a 1-and-1 or something like that. Like this idea that like we're reaching the end of the D'Lo era is, I think, misplaced. But it was encouraging as a resident, a real estate owner on D'Lo Island. It was encouraging to hear Redick speak as enthusiastically about Russell as he did. And I realize all of these things, there's a little bit of kabuki theater that goes along with every one of these, because, especially the coach was never going to bury players 4 days before training camp starts. And you're going to get an optimistic spin on the work that people are putting in the lab, Andy, and all this other stuff. But he didn't have to go quite as far with Russell as he did. And at least to me, the enthusiasm and relative appreciation for D'Lo's skill as a player felt genuine. It did not feel to me like he was blowing smoke. And so, like, none of this means they're not going to continue trying to trade the guy. It just means that I think that JJ Redick is perfectly happy to be coaching D'Angelo Russell this year. And from what Redick is saying, Russell seems happy to be coached by Redick.
It's funny, actually, reminding me when we were talking about the possibility that this might not be the end of this very, very awkward partnership between D'Lo and the Lakers. When D'Lo opted into his contract, I tweeted out at Cam Brothers, the year is 2030, late June.
Right.
Rob Pelinka anxiously awaits D'Angelo Russell's decision to exercise or decline the player option on his 5th consecutive 1+1 contract with the Lakers. Like, yeah, it doesn't feel entirely far-fetched. The part about Redick being enthusiastic about coaching D'Angelo, I agree with you. If nothing else, Redick, who I'd say for about 95% of this press conference, I thought Redick crushed everything that he was looking to sell. And it's something that Redick is very good at presentation and putting it out there in ways that feel believable. But one of the factors that I do think makes this believable is the history that D'Lo has with this organization, for better and for worse, and his time just permanently residing on the block, whether you're talking about his first stint with the Lakers or his second stint, the current stint with the Lakers. Redick has no history with any of that at all. None of that is JJ Redick's problem. None of it is anything that D'Lo is actually going to be wary about with JJ Redick. D'Lo, we've talked about before. D'Lo is a really, really smart guy. He's last season talked openly about, I know my contract was structured to be tradable. Mm-hmm. He's wise enough to understand what time it is, but I think he also, all things being equal, would like to stay here if he could find a way that it works for everyone, that doesn't feel like the minute he signs a contract he's immediately being shopped again. But in that sense, having a coach that at worst would feel neutral about him and at best would feel enthusiastic enough to be like, look, man, if you can play well enough to make your case for another contract with this team, we all win. I'm sure D'Lo enters that partnership enthusiastically.
It's funny, like what you're talking about here is sort of setting aside the baggage. And like I'm not here to say like, some of the problem here isn't Russell, like his attitude, that the way he comes off in a locker room, all this, like that he doesn't bear any responsibility for these things. That's not what I'm saying. But sometimes those things snowball, and like you said, it's not a person who comes in without any of that and can just be like, you know what, the guy's a pretty good basketball player, and at the very least, he's not an axe murderer. He's not is he a perfect locker room presence? No. And all of that is true, but
he's got a real penchant for saying the wrong thing at the wrong time.
Yes, he really does. Even when it's not inaccurate, but like not now.
He's got a little man. He's got a little Andrew Bynum in him.
Yes, which is great.
Another very smart guy. Too smart for his own good in a lot of ways.
If you can kind of step back from that and be like, okay, yeah, he's not an all-star. He's not one of my star players. He's not somebody we're going to lean on every night to lead us to wins in the same way that the Sixers are going to lean on Embiid and Maxey,
or George.
Right. If you can say like, okay, he's got a lot of good qualities. So he does a lot of things well. And we're going to have to, he is one of these guys that I think I can do something with. I think that's the enthusiasm that Redick has. And like coaches almost always, like, you talk about sales, we can quit here and get into some of this stuff again next week. But like you talk about sales, like there's a difference when a coach talks like coaches all like universally in the 20 years or whatever we've been doing this. It's like coaches take the guys that they have in front of them. And even if they wish they were better, they're going to find a good coach, at least is going to find like the joy, so to speak, in the guys that they have. And like, especially at this point in the season, maybe things change in March. The way the GM talks about it is different because the GM constructed the team. So if there are flaws that people are asking about and the GM is sort of deflecting, it's because that's when you feel like you're being sold something. And we can get into a little bit of that on Monday's show heading into media day, but it was an interesting press conference. I think it's still posted somewhere. People can go back and look at it. Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where you can go hang out with over 25,000 subscribers to the show. Leave us questions, leave us comments. We will be in the building in El Segundo Monday for Media Day. That'll take up, obviously, a lot of the conversation for Tuesday and going forward. If anything really big happens, maybe we'll pop in with a quick update or something like that. But other than that, we'll see everybody Monday. Have a great weekend.